Ms. Sanchez, the gentlelady from California, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know from experience how good investigations can really improve public policy. In 2009, my investigation shed light on the traumatic brain injury risks that accompany professional football, and I'm proud to say that that work changed how football teams and, more importantly, youth sports leagues address concussions. But I have also seen congressional oversight at its worst. I served on the Select Committee on Benghazi, and I saw how politicized and expensive that investigation was, and I want to note again that the final report found no new evidence of wrongdoing. Mr. Williams, you've handled oversight for both Congress and the executive branch. Based on your experience, what are the hallmarks of fair and effective congressional oversight?
Again, fair and effective oversight is number one. Does it serve to make government work and function better on behalf of the American people? And then I would say, two, is there a process of accommodation between the branches of government that are seeking to have information? And that's so that, you know, in my case, that was the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security, but any government entity, are they working productively together? Those two things.
I'm glad you raised the issue of accommodation process. Yeah. Can you explain why that's necessary and why the government can't simply comply with every congressional oversight request the moment that it's made?
Sure, and here's an example, Congressman Sanchez. It's actually more efficient in many circumstances for the parties to attempt to come to an agreement prior to whether it's issuing subpoenas or going straight to hearings and so on, because of the fact that things that are more contentious are far more likely to end up in litigation and tied up in the courts for whether it's months or years thereafter. Where if the parties had just at the beginning tried to resolve it, like the judge I clerked for used to say, "Can't y'all work this out?" We'll try to work it out up front and come to some agreement where not everybody gets what they were initially asking for, but somehow the process moves forward.
Last week, just 2 weeks after being named chairman, Mr. Jordan served multiple subpoenas seeking internal information from the executive branch. In your experience, can it sometimes take time for the accommodations process to play out?
Exactly, as I said, it can take time, but it's far more productive to end up with a more time-consuming process up front, but where everybody ends up getting what they want.
Thank you. Now, I'm not a prosecutor, but you've been a prosecutor,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
The chairman of this select committee held a press conference earlier this week to talk about various interviews that his staff is conducting. Yes. Now, I haven't been able to be in those interviews, but I want to ask you about some things that the committee should keep in mind as it moves forward with our work on this select committee. Could the fact that someone has no firsthand knowledge of the matters they're discussing impact the credibility of what they say?
Yes.
And what if they vocally advocated conspiracy theories that have no basis in fact? Should that impact how the committee views their testimony?
Yes, openly advocating conspiracy theories that have no basis in fact would have a negative impact on an open investigation.
Thank you. And now I just want to clarify some of the discussion that we've heard about parents protesting at school board meetings. People have the right to free speech in this country, but is that an absolute right?
Absolutely, and the best example is threats against other people are not, it's just not protected speech.
And in fact, many of these people who have shown up at school board meetings had threatened school board officials with violence or even with death. And isn't that the reason why they were placed on this,
Sure.
special sort of monitoring thing to make sure that they were not going to carry out those threats of violence?
To be clear, Congressman, I'm not familiar with the particulars of each individual case. I can say, however, and this is based on my experience as a prosecutor, if somebody threatened somebody else or violated the law in another way in a manner that could either, the term is probable cause, if there's probable cause to believe that an offense was committed, then certainly law enforcement can take action. And frankly, if law enforcement oversteps its bounds, there's a process through the civil rights process or any other way of dealing with that and addressing it.
So again, we have the right to free speech in this country, but it's not absolute if it includes threats against other people. And it's not just violence that we should be looking out for, but it's also threats of violence that law enforcement should be looking out for.
Absolutely, it's the threats of violence because, look, to be quite straightforward, threats of violence lead to violence or can.
Great, thank you. I appreciate your testimony, and I yield back.